Hey, how you doing? This is RJ. Today I'm going to talk about a new series that's coming out from DC in the fall called Superman Smashes the Klan. And no, I'm not joking. And I'm surprised that no one else has been talking about this yet. But the reason why I want to talk about this is because in my videos I concentrate on Marvel a lot. And I say that I concentrate on Marvel because the crazy is just on display at Marvel. They have this quote-unquote progressive agenda, and the craziness of this agenda is just on display at Marvel. But I also put in the caveat at the end that the same goes for DC. They just hide the crazy much better. And this is my example here of how DC handles the crazy, but they still have the same agenda. They do it in a much more subtle way. Whereas you have Marvel, and they're just taking a piece of dynamite and lighting the fuse and saying, nothing bad is going to happen with this. With DC, they just subtly take this piece of dynamite, put it over next to a raging, uncontrollable fire, and stand back and say, well, if it blows up, it's not our fault. This is the way DC subtly handles these issues. And I'll have to say right off the bat, I really, really hope I'm wrong with this series that's going to come out, because when I heard about freedom fighters originally, and they're going to be fighting Nazis, I said to myself, oh, here we go. But I was quite pleasantly surprised. Freedom Fighters has actually turned out to be what I think is the best comic that DC has put out this year. But when I look at all the stuff surrounding Superman Smashes the Klan, it really doesn't appear like this is going to be the same type of thing. So what I'm going to be talking about is an article put out by The Hollywood Reporter, and I'm going to put the link in the description if you want to read it. It's actually a fairly long article compared to most of the ones that I go over. But right now I want to concentrate on who they are talking to, and it is the writer of this series called Gene Luen Yang. And Yang is, I would say, the epitome of this DC subtle approach to this progressive agenda. Because I have read things by Yang before, like The Terrifics, and I kind of liked it. And he's not very heavy-handed with his quote-unquote agenda. But I went to his Twitter just to check out exactly what he's saying about this series that he's going to be writing. And it seemed to me, again, that he was very subtle in what he does. Most of the tweets, if not all of the tweets that he himself puts out, are promotion of his books, which is great. He promotes his books, he's trying to sell them, he's trying to generate hype for the books that he writes. But he likes to retweet other people as well. He never goes into this quote-unquote progressive agenda himself, but he retweets things from other people. And those retweets would include things like white privilege, and how that white privilege should pay for slave reparations, and how editors need to carve out a special section that is reserved for people of color and disabled people and the like, so that they can make their way into comics. And this is a progressive mindset. And I think this is the subtle touch of DC right here. Because I've said this before, and I'll go over it again in this video later, that these progressive people, what they do is they present an argument according to logical fallacies, usually according to appeal to emotion. And so I hate to use logical fallacies, and I do not employ them myself, but you really have to look at logical fallacies, because this is the way that these people actually operate. They operate according to selling you an idea by emotion. That's appeal to emotion, which is a logical fallacy. And I would say that DC employs guilt by association in a very unique way. That is to say that they take these things, like Superman Smashes the Klan. They give it to this guy who is just slightly progressive. You know, he doesn't overtly stick it in your face, but he is connected to a bunch of other people who are very, very progressive. And all they need to do is have him promote it and then retweet these things from these other people who are very progressive, and they are the ones, these people who are connected with him, that are going to take this thing and make it explode. Now again, that's guilt by association. I'm using that logical fallacy not because I'm employing it as part of my argument, but because this is what DC is doing. They're taking this dynamite and they're setting it next to a raging fire. And if it blows up, they're going to stand back and say, hey, it's not our fault. We didn't light the fuse. No, but you put it next to people who will light the fuse. Because I can see these progressive people employing another logical fallacy, which would be equivocation, in order to sell this idea as something else to the comic readers. That is to say, they're going to connect this old idea of the KKK, which is Superman Smashes the Klan, and connect it to, who do you think? They're going to connect it to modern day Republicans, and to the idea that anybody who wants any kind of immigration control whatsoever, even if that's just a immigration that has some control on it and has some system in order to deal with things, they're all members of the KKK. This is conflagration of two ideas. This is equivocation, basically, what they are doing with their argument. And when I went through Yang's Twitter feed, I saw this exact thing, because he likes to retweet Greg Pak. Now, Greg Pak works for Marvel, and the crazy is on display at Marvel, and he writes things like Agents of Atlas. And right off the bat, when I went from Yang's Twitter feed to Pak's Twitter feed, I saw exactly what I was looking for, because he has me blocked. Now, I have never visited his Twitter feed ever before. I've only talked about one of his books in a tangent in one of my videos, so I really doubt he has any clue who I am whatsoever. But he has me blocked, I'm sure, because I am associated, that is to say, I subscribe to some of the people that he doesn't like Richard Meyer. And so I'm part of a block list. And so right off the bat, you have these tolerant, progressive people mass blocking people. And I'm not joking when I say this, but one of these Twitter feeds, I can't remember which, if it was Pak or Yang, but they have this little cartoon up in their Twitter feed that says, in order to follow the virtue of tolerance, and by the way, tolerance is not a virtue, that in order to follow the virtue of tolerance, you need to be intolerant towards some people. And by the way, quick aside, I'm sure this will not shock anybody. I think tolerance is a bunch of horse manure. I think people need to be heroic. People need to be virtuous. You need to be prudent. You need to be just. You need to be courageous. You need to be temperate. And all of those real virtues need to be under the greater virtues of things like charity. So be heroic, and that way you don't have to worry about this conundrum of being tolerant by being intolerant. So you have this mindset that in order to be tolerant, you have to be intolerant of some people. And when I go to Greg Pak's Twitter feed, because in order to get around his block, all I got to do is take his address and put it into one of the other two browsers that I got open all the time. It's fairly simple. When I looked through his feed, how many tweets do you think it took until you saw this conflagration of this idea that modern day KKK members or Nazis are just people who are Republicans? Well, it took 2 tweets. I just went to the second tweet that was on his page when I got there. And right there it is. And I went through his feed and I could find several other of these things. So I would say the entire point of this book is to try and get this idea that modern Republicans and anybody, whether you be Republican or Democrat or anybody who has within their head that immigration should be a controlled thing, which, by the way, Democrats believed right up until Donald Trump won the election, anybody who believes that is either a member of the KKK or is a Nazi. Now, let's get into this article itself. And I'll give you the blurb at the first of this article just to give you an introduction. But as usual, what I'm going to do is go backwards through this article, because this is the way these progressive people present an argument. They present it in a way that is appeal to emotion. So they build up emotion until they actually make their point at the end. And if you want to understand what they're trying to do, what their end goal is, first you got to start at the end of the article and then move your way backwards. But the blurb at the first says this: writer Jean Len Yang drew inspiration from a 1940s radio serial in which the superhero took on real-life bigotry. It was a story in which Superman made America a better place, in the real world as well as the fictional world of Metropolis. Throughout the summer of 1946, the Man of Steel dealt with the Clan of the Fiery Cross every day on the popular Adventures of Superman radio show, with the fictional bigots standing in for the real-world Ku Klux Klan. Using information provided by the activist Stetson Kennedy, the show reportedly revealed KKK code words and hidden details, unmasking the group for what it was for an eager audience ready to hear Superman fighting back injustice. According to contemporaneous reports, the serial negatively impacted Klan membership and recruiting. Starting this fall, Superman is going to return to the fight with Superman Smashes the Klan, a 3-part serial by American-born Chinese author and MacArthur Fellowship recipient Gene Len Yang, and Gu Rai Hairu, and I'm sure I'm not pronouncing that correctly, that adapts and updates the famous radio storyline for a contemporary comic book audience. Now, contained within this little blurb is all of the logical fallacies that you're going to see within the rest of the article. First of all, they're talking about this old Superman radio show. And yes, it was built upon the information from this Kennedy guy who infiltrated the Ku Klux Klan, and he used some of that in order to make this show. But within the radio show itself, Superman doesn't actually fight the Ku Klux Klan. He fights the Clan of the Fiery Cross. And so you have this conflagration of these two ideas right off the bat, because this new series, Superman is directly fighting the Ku Klux Klan. They don't put any little DC spin on it and give it its own name. No, it's the Ku Klux Klan. But they gloss over that little bit of information, and then they talk about the author, who is an American-born Chinese author. Well, here you have your beginning of your appeal to emotion and what the entire thing goes through at the first for its appeal to emotion. You have this author, and yes, he does have some unique perspectives as being a person who is both Chinese and American, and he talks about, I had 2 names when I was a kid, an American name and a Chinese name, one when I was in China, one when I was in America, and all of these kinds of ideas, and he ties them into Superman being an illegal immigrant into the United States. And it starts off with this fairly simple premise that, all immigrants feel different, especially these ones who are illegal immigrants like Superman, and so you have to explore that. And this is the wedge in the door, the emotional wedge in there, in order to open up that crack, in order for them to begin to sell you this emotional argument, which they get to at the end. And what is that emotional argument at the end? Well, they give it right here. This radio play negatively impacted Klan membership and recruitment when it came out in the 1940s. And what they're doing is they're updating this famous radio storyline for a contemporary comic book audience. Why? Because they want to take this idea that anyone who even suggests a hint of immigration control, well, they're the equivalent of the KKK or a Nazi, and therefore we must make sure that they are in decline by taking these ideas and making them so repugnant to a new audience today. And I really don't think there's any coincidence that this is coming out slightly before the next election. So, now having gone over that blurb at the first, let's jump to the end of the article. And here's a quote from the end of the article. The reporter asks Gene Yang this question. You're a national ambassador for young people's literature, and comics specifically. When you're working on a project like this, especially on a character as iconic as Superman, is it something that you can see as a tool for new readers to use to get into not just Superman, not just comics, but stories about things that are happening in the real world, stories that matter? And Yang's answer to this is the following. I actually feel rather lucky to be working in comics today. I think over the last maybe 10 to 20 years, we've seen this shift in the public perception of comics. More and more, people are open to the idea of comics dealing with serious topics, and I hope this project fits in with that. I do think that there is a growing wave of comics that want to tackle the very heart of what it means to, and then he goes off into a tangent, but comes back and says, one of the best examples of using genre to talk about very important and serious topics. I'm trying to do something similar with this Superman book. Okay, so you have Yang, and he's talking in a very subtle way, and he actually says it very directly, that he's not so much concerned about the message. He's concerned about exploring these ideas and letting other people see the exploration of these ideas. And again, this is your subtle DC way of taking this powder keg and putting it next to a raging fire. But the point of this story and why it is coming out right now is because they want to use this story for another means. Now, he says himself that he's not trying to be didactic. That is to say, he's not trying to teach people a lesson. But really, if you look at that statement that I just read, yeah, he's actually presenting a lesson to people and saying, oh, take it or leave it. But let's look at the people that he's actually presenting it to. In order to do that, let's go to the previous question that was asked. The previous question was, did you go into it with the idea that this lesson needs to be retaught? This is, after all, a project aimed at young readers. Were you thinking in terms of lessons needing to be relearned in today's culture? Well, as I said, you have Yang, and he answers the question, and he says, no, I'm not trying to teach anybody a lesson. But at the same time, right after that, he says, well, he's using these comics to delve into these bigger ideas that he wants to present to people. And who are these people that he's presenting them to? Well, as the interviewer indicates, Yang is a national ambassador for young people's literature. So he's trying to sell it to young people. And although Yang seems to be trying to hide that just a little bit in this interview, you have the interviewer, and he's not hiding that at all. He's saying, isn't this project aimed at young readers? Don't they need to be taught a lesson and retaught what is going on about the Ku Klux Klan and Nazis? And again, Yang is very light-handed in the way that he does this, but if you go through his Twitter feed, when he's trying to sell this specific book in his Twitter feed, you come across a retweet right in the middle of that from someone else who I do believe is connected to him in this National Ambassadorship for Young People program. And she says, Superman Smashes the Klan is based on a radio program from 1946. In addition to being an important and compelling read, there are social study tie-ins galore. This is absolutely a book you will want in your classroom. And again, I have to restate that Yang retweeted this specific tweet in his feed right in the middle of him promoting this book itself. Therefore, you have him quoting probably exactly what he would say, if he had some cojones, as a national ambassador for young people's literature and comics specifically. And that is that these books should be directed not towards your comic buying public, but towards kids. Kids in the classroom. And what are kids in the classroom supposed to do? Well, they're supposed to take these comics that have social studies tie-ins galore. You'll notice social studies, not civics. Social studies tie-ins. And they're going to use these books as an example of these ideas, these KKK ideas, these ideas from the 1940s. And again, you're looking at the art in the background and you see that one of these villains that Superman is attacking has a Nazi symbol on his chest. So they're taking the idea of KKK and they're linking it right in there with Nazi. And then they are going to link it with what I show you next, with immigration itself. Because previous to that, the interviewer makes this statement. There's the fact that this story is being published today. We are at a point in history now where even the discussion of immigration in America is this impossibly charged topic. It feels important at this moment to have a story, specifically to have a Superman comic that pushes back so clearly against bigotry and racism that does make the appeal for tolerance. And here's Yang's answer to that statement, and you'll have to bear with me because this is a long quote. He says, "It's not just America. You read news about Europe, India, or the Philippines. I started this project because I thought it was something that I needed to understand." And I'm going to skip ahead just a little, and he says, "Things that I've learned is that the world learned something about tolerance after World War II. Not just America. All of us learned something about tolerance. World War II was the worst nationalistic instincts of the world come to a head. The worst instincts of our species had manifested themselves pretty much everywhere in the world. And then this Superman story, which arrived a year after the war ended, was primed to convey the lesson the world had learned to a younger generation. I just think that maybe we're so far removed from that period that we're beginning to forget those lessons. That was the impression that I got." So again, here you have the author himself saying, yes, this is a lesson, and we're drifting away from that lesson. Now, he says later, I'm not trying to teach anybody a lesson, but if you look at these words and the things that he posts on his Twitter, yeah, he's trying to teach this lesson, and he's trying to teach this lesson to children. And I would say there's no mystery in why the art looks like it does, because they're trying to teach this to young children, and they want to bring these ideas into the social studies classes, that you have these old organizations like the KKK, like the Nazis. And in order for you to understand what's going on today, in order for you to understand, in their words, the bigotry that's going on all over the world today, including America, you have to be taught this idea of tolerance. You'll see that he's trying to promote these ideas to young people, especially in a classroom, not really a comic book audience, in order for them to understand these ideas in history, in order to link them, as this interviewer specifically does, to the idea of immigration in America today. And very briefly, if you go back into the previous part of the interview, what they do is they mix up the idea of legal immigration with illegal immigration. And they make it sound like it's the exact same thing, which it is not, because Yang talks about his experience and his family's experience as immigrants. But he's talking about their family experience as legal immigrants. And then he configurates that idea, he mixes it all up with the idea of illegal immigration, which he uses the example of Superman as an illegal immigrant. And that leads right into what we have here. Talk about immigration and how these old ideas, these old institutions like the KKK, like the Nazis, they were an example of nationalism, not going to concentrate on their socialist origins whatsoever of the National Socialist or the socialist eugenic origins of the KKK. No, you're not going to go there. No, you have to link it to nationalism, which, by the way, every country in history was a nation and defended itself as a nation. So that's so broad a statement that they're making that it's pretty much irrelevant. But no, you have to blame all of these things on nationalism. You have to blame all these things upon people who want control of immigration. And again, you do that by sticking that emotional wedge in there of confusing the idea of legal immigrants with illegal immigrants, who are people that their first act in your country is to break the law of that country in order to get into your country. You got to mix up all of those ideas, and you got to stick them into a comic book, and you got to get the comic book into classrooms, and then you have to bring it into the discussion of social studies, and you have to take these historical ideas that people are no longer familiar with, and you have to teach these children that these people in history are the exact same as the people today. Anybody who feels patriotic, anybody who feels that they need to defend their nation, anybody who feels that a border is actually a good thing. And how do they do that? What is the best way that they can do that? Well, they do it by taking, as they say, the icon of Superman, the icon of truth, justice, and the American way, and they use this icon to sell to young children in the classroom the idea that, moving forward, if you want to defend your nation, that makes you a bigot. Anyway, if I've given you anything new to think about, hit like, hit the shield in the lower right-hand corner of your screen to subscribe, and leave me a comment. Tell me what you think about all this. All right, I'll see you later. Bye.